Finally, in the new characters, Rumple is a pretty good character, but I feel like the crew tried too hard to make him likable. Then there's Vector, who is just too over the top to be a villain, and at most times, he can be annoying. And then there are the villains, who are the best characters in the movie. Now I'm talking about Naira, Metalbeak, and Clud, and there has never been a villain like them and provided with some great acting since Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Naira and Metalbeak are, of course, evil, and every time you see them, they are ruthless and very threatening. And they don't care that kids are watching. They would go and kill other owls to achieve their goal. And Clud, who is Soren's brother, doesn't really start well as a character. He's pretty cliche, like he's not as good as his bro, so when he's in the evil organization, he stays there because they appreciate more of his talents than the others. But when he's evil, oh boy does this guy get freaky. The characters. And then there's Hal, that I have a problem with. He's played by Jonah Hill. Now, I'm not saying he's bad in this, in fact, he's terrific. But it's just when I see this character, I don't see the character. To me, it's just Jonah Hill playing Jonah Hill. And what's worse, they even look the same. Mother Gothel? Well, I don't know what to say about her. On one side, she's a good villain and Donna Murphy does a great performance, but something tells me that Disney already did that before, like Ursula maybe. On the red side, we got Tibble, who's not that bad of a villain and funny along with Fawn and the Tiny Red Gnomes. There's also the sexist supervisor, the main antagonist of the movie, who looks like if you mixed the Grand Councilwoman from Lilo and Stitch and the Emperor from Star Wars and make her try to speak a European language that she had no idea that existed. Anyways, she doesn't really make an impact on this film, so as a villain, she's not that good. Then there's Nigel, who I somehow enjoy him as a villain. He reminds me of Stewie from the early episodes of Family Guy. And then there's Hansel and Gretel, the main villains of the movie. By the way, that's not really a spoiler, you learned that midway through the film. Anyways, they are just terrible villains. I think they said what was their motive, but all I understood was that they're just evil for just being evil. Plus, for the little German kids, they sound way too old for their age. I mean, I've never heard such a bad casting choice since Matthew Broderick as a little boy mouse. Anyways, the best new character of the movie is the main villain, Lord Shen, played by Gary Oldman. There is so much development and backstory on this guy to really understand why he would do this and for what cause. But that's not all. When he's in a fighting scene, he is so cool and so menacing, even when he's with his cannon. Professor Z is the villain of the movie. Two of the villains, who are Jack and Jill by the way, are just hilarious and freaky how they are so big and threatening. Much better than that horrible evil Hansel and Gretel. Then there's the villain, Sakharine, who is the true definition of an evil genius. Not only does he know all about the mystery of the unicorn, but he also made Haddock's crew go on his side and has a falcon as an evil pet that can be pretty useful. There's a lot more about him that I didn't say yet, but that would require to spoil some plot elements of the movie. But I can say that he is one great villain. I would like to. Then there's Haru, who I think is the maid of the house and also the villainish of the movie. But there's one thing that really irritates me about her, and it's that her purpose with the borrowers isn't clear. Does she want them for money? Does she want to eat them? Does she want them dead? I don't know! She's such a great character, but I just want to know, what does she want with them? like that. There's also the main villain of the film, which is O'Hare, who reminds me way too much of Lord Farquaad from Shrek. He also looks like if Farquaad had a baby with Edna from The Incredibles. But the main antagonist of the movie is Queen Victoria. And yes, that Queen Victoria. She starts out as more of the man type of villain, but once you learn about her true goals, she's an insane and mad type of villain, making her not only great, but the kind you just love to hate. But then we have Cruella de Vil. I mean Captain Dubois DeVille. Yeah, like how Makunga in the second movie is a lot like Scar, Dubois reminds me too much of Cruella de Vil. Except she doesn't have much of a purpose. All she wants is just Alex's head for her collection. Also, she doesn't even add into the plot. She does nothing to the circus group, so what's the point of having her? The films. When it comes to the new characters, they're not much better than the old ones. Let's start with the antagonists of the film, the pirates, or the ones who stand out more from the rest. First, there's Captain Gut. With Peter Dinklage's performance, he can be a good menacing villain, but I don't think he can be a good menacing pirate. And then we have King Candy, who is best described as if the Mad Hatter from Disney's Alice in Wonderland has gone evil. I wouldn't say much about him because that would give out major spoilers, but as the movie comes closer to the end, you'll see that he's more evil than you think, and the reasons why are pretty legit. They may not be as pimps, and then there's the main villain, Pitch, aka the Boogeyman. He's as if you take Hades from Hercules and you give him a more slow and menacing approach to him. He can get threatening at times, and there are some moments where it feels like there's a good chance that he'll actually win. But then we have General Shanker, who fails miserably as a villain because they try to make him more like his voice actor, William Shatner, than being an actual threat to the main characters. And then there's Mandrake, the villain of the film. Thanks to Christoph Waltz, he manages to pull off the charismatic yet sinister and menacing villain like what he did in Inglourious Basterds. Then there's Dean Hardscrabble, who's more the antagonist of the first act. She's not fully evil, but she has an approach that's similar to Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, where she's menacing but in a calm approach, and we always see her in the shadows, but we know she's there. For the Scare Games team, the only important ones are Uzma Kappa and Roar Omega Roar. The ROR team are the antagonists of the second act, but not as good as Hardscrabble since they are just the popular jocks and we don't focus on them a lot. In Team main new ones, there's the villain of the film, who I won't say for spoiler reasons, who I find to be a more funnier and better antagonist than Vector from the first film. Then, the most different character of the group would be Guy Gagné, the Indy 500 champ who is Theo's idol, but in the race, oh, he's not really a nice guy. No big shock. It's Pink, while Ripslinger is the straight-up bad guy defending champion who just wants to win with his henchmen, Ned and Zed. Take him off. Now, when it comes to the new characters, now, there's not much new characters, like literally almost all of them are pointless, except for that one villain. Essentially, it's Chester V! Yes, Chester V! Like I said, the guy with no bones, and essentially, he's literally a freaking replacement of the mayor from the first movie that was voiced by Bruce Campbell. Literally, he's just there, like, that's the thing. He's just there to replace the mayor, and he went through the exact same things, and he has the exact same goals as the mayor from the first movie, where he wants to use Flint's food machine and use it at his power. And, you know, it's just not, like, there's no changes, except now he proves that he can be even worse than Flint. Like, Flint is already, too over the top himself, but this guy takes it to a whole new level. Like, literally, the animators have tried way too hard for him, like with his exaggerated moves and being over the top. It's just, you know, Flint alone is too much. We don't need to add anything more. And like, he's a perfect example. Like, he's a terrible villain in general, and he's just, I feel like it's disgusting to watch. It feels sad and disgusting to watch, is all I'm saying. So, in a whole, there's nothing new that we learn from the characters. They're all... And then there's Miles Standish, the man who goes out hunting for turkeys for his Hungry Town bounty hunter style. He's okay as a villain, not really intimidating, but still has a threatening nature, and you know there will be trouble when you see him on screen. Not the best villain I've seen, but decent enough to pass. Then there's Hans, who Anna immediately falls in love with at the beginning of the movie, and the one who's in charge of the castle while she's away to find her sister. While in the castle, he does a very good job taking care of the people and to go plan out ideas along the way. Love interest and Scowler, Patchy's jerky and full of himself brother. There's also Raccoon, who's the leader of the animals that just adds into the unfriendly tone by having such a grudge over Surly. There's Lord Business, the evil ruler in charge of the LEGO world, who doesn't understand the ideology of the Master Builders and plots to freeze everything. Sounds weird, I know, but it has a very logical explanation at the end of the film about her. But then there's Mrs. Grunion, who plots to take Sherman away from Peabody because he's a dog. Seriously, she has no point in this film other than because this movie needs a villain. It doesn't establish why she has such a vendetta over Peabody other than he's a dog. As for the rest, the best character that I can think of is actually Nigel. He doesn't have a point in this like all the others, but at least he's funny and entertaining as the over-the-top Shakespearean villain. For the rest, and then there's the Jester, who I will admit has set up an interesting backstory as the Wicked Witch's brother who has been cursed to always be the fool. But he's pretty much the Wicked Witch of the West who wants to take over Oz. The only reason why they didn't just use the witch is because she's dead. Astrid. And then there's Draco Bloodfist. Let me tell you, there has never been a DreamWorks villain this menacing and this awesome since Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2. Not only does he look fierce, but also his need for a dragon army gives him a great backstory and makes him very threatening. Who cares? And then there's Cad Spinner, the owner of the lodge next to the fire station. Some may argue he could be the villain, but no. He's just a dickbag that cares more about himself and his lodge more than everything else around him. And then there's Archibald Snatcher, who is the best character of them all. He is so determined to be in the high ranks and getting a white hat that he'll stop at nothing to get rid of every single box troll. And he even knows some of the secrets about them that no one else does. I just love this guy! There's so much that went into him, and Ben Kingsley brought in such a wonderful performance to the character. But to the bad guys led by Chakal from outside of town. Then there's the man in the kabuki mask, a really interesting and unique villain who's like if Amon from The Legend of Korra has the power of Sorcerer Mickey in Fantasia. However, as cool as he is, his actual identity is very obvious, and I'm saying this as someone who was surprised to find that King Candy is actually Turbo, or that Hans is actually a bad guy. And then there's the villain of the film, Dave, who honestly could have been a great villain. He has such a great backstory that even ties in a bit with the world of Madagascar, but the problem is that he's executed in a really over-the-top manner that takes away any threat or sense of seriousness to the guy. But then again, the movie doesn't want to take itself seriously, so it's not really his fault. Although they are hates love for obvious reasons, but he's actually not the antagonist. That would be Roland, the Gaston-type misogynist that wants to marry Marianne in order to be king. Oh, I'm sorry, was that a spoiler? I don't care, this movie doesn't earn my respect to keep its secrets. And then there's the villain of the film, Burger Beard, whom in concept sounds interesting and would actually pass as an antagonist in SpongeBob. But in execution, he just feels a little too goofy and doesn't seem to pass as a threat as much as Plankton in the first movie. This is a bit due to both the writing and Antonio Banderas' performance, so his only issue is that he could have been handled better.
What are you doing?
Other than that, there's just Captain Smek, who's just the egotistical comedy relief, Kyle, who's just more plot-confused, goofy sense of humor. And then there's Scarlet Overkill and her husband Herb, who aren't really that much memorable actually. I mean, for who they are, they're just simply described as the supervillains of the film, and there's not much else to say. They do try to be over the top to bring forth their own brand of humor, but it feels pointless of them to do so. I mean, what works with Gru is that he mostly plays the straight man while the minions are the goofballs, and that's what makes him such a lovable character. But with Scarlet and Herb, it's like they're trying to be funny only to realize later that they don't have to. I mean, they're in a Minions movie. It doesn't need any extra jokes. As Arm in Order, Trumper is the villain who is out to capture our heroes and all the other chapters to the nasty pterodactyls, and especially... And then there's Mr. Green, the villain that rather wants to be so over the top with his movements and have no logical motive to make houses in the Arctic than to be an actual character. Oh hey, Chester V, never thought I'd see you again! As for everyone... And then there's Kai, the villain of the film that wants to harness the power of chi from every master fighter. In concept, he sounds like a really fascinating villain that can add a new level to the Kung Fu Panda world, but in execution, he seems like he wants to be more comedic than actually be threatening. There is one that I'd rather not say for spoiler reasons, but it does seem like now it's a tradition since Wreck-It Ralph that it has a surprise twist villain. Admittedly, in here, it works pretty well, and it does make the prejudice commentary more effective. If there is... Chairman Drek is one of the villains that wants to blow up planets because let's rip off Star Wars some more, and build a new planet because reasons, along with his silent giant. As for the pigs, on paper they're just the bland villains. There's nothing much about them other than they just want to eat eggs. However, in practice, they're actually pretty funny. They're kind of the saving grace of the second act, and can deliver a wonderful performance thanks to both the animators and Bill Hader as Leonard.
Where are we going?
And then you have Snowball, the leader of a group of rebellious animals who seek revenge on the human race for the treatment they've gotten. He could possibly be the funniest character in here just by how villainous and over the top he can be, all while presenting himself as this cute little bunny rabbit. Are pointless, the new villains, the Dromaeosaurs, feel like they came out of a Land Before Time sequel and grocery store. And then there's Douche, the movie's antagonist who's looking for revenge for missing his opportunity to get some action with one of the gods and get broken in the process.
Are you two responsible for my not?
And then there are the sisters, who are the daughters of the Moon King and work for him to catch Kubo. As villains, they are absolutely freaky in the best way possible. With their dark powers and threateningly calm nature, they are on the same levels as the other mother in Coraline. They're a moron with a good heart, and the cats May and Mal are the Team Rocket style villains where one is smarter than the other who want to kill off Crusoe and his friends. As for the villains, Hunter provides some great humor by presenting himself of how he is the big head of Cornerstone. And then there's Chef, the main antagonist that wants to capture the trolls so that everybody could eat them and become ruler of Bergentown. In short, she's your simple villain doing villainous things in a villainous tone. As for everyone else, what's probably surprising from this film though is that it doesn't have a main antagonist. Okay, technically, the characters have to face 3 opponents who aim for Tefiti's heart, like the Kakamora, Tamatoa, and Taka. But they act more like enemies that appear in a scene or two than actually be considered as a member of the Disney villains. Don't get me wrong though, they're great and they pose as a major threat, but they don't appear as much to be considered as a true villain. And then you have the Joker, whom out of all the characters feels the least like the DC character he's supposed to play. I get the development of wanting to be Batman's greatest enemy, and it is good, but it's just that Zach Galifianakis' performance doesn't feel like the Joker character at all. If he was one of the more obscure villains of Gotham, then it would have been a better fit. But instead, we got someone who can be best described as the Joker that's not the Joker. Comedy, and you got Francis, who is the CEO of Puppy Co. and the main villain that wants revenge on Baby Corp with the help of his tough brother Eugene. And then you have Gargamel. If there's one thing that the previous films did better than this one, it's that at least Hank Azaria tries to pull off a goofy villain with his own comedic flair, thus making him stand out as Gargamel. Here, however, with Rainn Wilson's performance and the way that he's written, he's been completely reduced to a generic villain that only wants more power.
And finally, use that magic to become the most powerful wizard in the world! Oh, look at me with hair.
It doesn't help either that the film fails at making him funny with cheap jokes and constantly make this running gag about his ego. All these world functions. And then you have the villain, straight from the 4th book, Professor Poopy Pants. Unlike in the book though, Poopy Pants would immediately come out as evil right from the start with only one scene that would explain how people laughing at his name made him snap into madness.
And for the last few years, you've been in a very dark place, and your title was Revenge Seeker?
Yeah, that's basically what I've been up to.
His goal is to get rid of the world's laughter so his name wouldn't be laughed at anymore with the help of the snobbish teacher's pet with no sense of humor, Melvin Sneedly. So, if those are the only characters to keep an eye on, what about Jackson Storm, the new hot rod that's portrayed to be the new villain? Well, honestly, he acts more like an obstacle than an actual antagonist. Sure, he's mean to McQueen, but he doesn't appear that often to make that much of an impact to the film. His goal. And then you have Balthazar Brat, one of the most enjoyable animated villains in recent years. He just refuses to move on from his past to the point that he actually now believes that he is the character he played on TV as a child star in the 80s. Not only does he surround himself with everything related to that decade, but he's just fueled by madness with a need for revenge from Hollywood from canceling his show. Smiler is the generic big evil boss that demands order to the emojis, and Jailbreak is the wild off and teamwork, and the mayor is the new antagonist who is nothing but an over-the-top politician who cares about nothing but money, and has an equally over-the-top daughter. And Regine, the villain of the film that's trying so hard to take down Felicie and make her daughter Camille to be the star. If you want to know why, well, how can I put this? I think the film might have explained it for just a quick second, but it didn't do a good job to clarify her reasons. I know that to the movie. Then there's his dad, Lord Garmadon, the villain of the feature that always terrorizes the city so he could rule it. I'll give him that he does have a well-crafted backstory, and Justin Theroux provided an enjoyable performance. The only issue with him, though, is that it's noticeable that he's trying to emulate Lord Businessman, both in appearance and with his comical tone. As for the villains, well, I know I kept on saying that the main bad guy is the Storm King, but he doesn't appear a lot in the film, and when he does, he acts more like a goofball than anything.
It's the magic of...
Yeah. Friendship and flowers and ponies and blue.
Now, the real antagonist of this movie that does all the hard work is actually Tempest Shadow. Out of all the characters in this film, she's probably the one that actually has any sort of development throughout the film. It would take a bit of time to show why she's evil and what happened to her horn, but for the most part, she's the threatening and mighty commander to the Storm King that would stop at nothing to capture Twilight Sparkle. Journey, Rufus and Thaddeus are the villain's dogs who are hunting for Mary. By the way, why do we need a villain in the nativity story? And the other father.
Speaking of which, there is also Ernesto de la Cruz, Miguel's idol and superstar musician that is the ticket to return among the living and still capable of playing music. His role in the film would later seem predictable, but again, the execution of his role by how he's written and his charming performance does make him a strong addition to the cast. I'd even throw in the Matador in this just by how over the top he would act to show that he's the villain and says how he's the best at what he does. The only one that seems to have a little more than a simple characteristic is Lord Nuth, the ruler of the Bronze Age land with a colonizer mentality and has a strong love for money more than literally anything else. Mayor Kobayashi is the authoritarian mayor that wants to get rid of all the dogs with the help of his assistant Major Domo. Working, she stays focused on trying to take down the new villain of the movie, Screenslaver, a hacker that has the ability to hypnotize and brainwash whoever is watching the screen they control. The antagonist is interesting and could show a lot of potential at first, but as the movie would progress and the audience learns more about who this person is, the suspense ends up feeling underwhelming. I'll just say now that Screenslaver is most likely who you think it is, and we can probably agree that Syndrome is a lot better. Moving to the fan, Erica. But with this love comes a dark secret where Erica is actually the great-granddaughter of the legendary monster hunter Abraham Van Helsing, as they both plot to take down all the monsters. So yes, folks, Dracula is in love with the villain, and in no way whatsoever does she ever turn good. It will never happen that she would develop feelings for Drac, fall in love with him during her mission, and ending up saving his life, followed by everybody dancing the Macarena. Nope, she's obviously evil the whole way through.
Must have been garlic in the guacamole.
Isn't that deadly?
To joke around. And then you have Slade, the movie's villain with the power of mind manipulation. Obviously a lot different than his previous interpretations, this Slade is more cynical, and his powers are more used to take advantage of the Titan's stupidity. However, his manipulations can be quite real, and the movie does later show how he would be a worthwhile foe with some legitimate threat. As for the Miles and Peter, the saying can be applied to the villains, like the main one, Kingpin, where he does seem quite threatening by his massive size and brutal strength, but as a character, he would feel underdeveloped for having his side of the story feel like an afterthought. He does have all the right materials to be great, including a good motivation, it's just his structure wasn't well put together. As for the Miles and Peter, the saying can be applied to the villains, like the main one, Kingpin, where he does seem quite threatening by his massive size and brutal strength, but as a character, he would feel underdeveloped for having his side of the story feel like an afterthought. He does have all the right materials to be great, including a good motivation, it's just his structure wasn't well put together. As for the
Oh, great.
Then there is Rex Dangervest, an obvious satire on the roles that Chris Pratt would usually play that would aid Emmett in becoming the tougher man he was looking to be. Add in some, and then there is the villain of the feature, Grimmel the Grizzly. I do see what this movie wanted to do with him. Comparable to Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds, Grimmel would put more emphasis on charisma and would use his smarts to make sure that he is always 2 or 3 steps ahead to get what he wants.
Nothing's accidental when it comes to old Grimmel. He lives for the hunt, to get inside the mind of his prey, to control its every choice. It's all a game to him.
In a way, he's like a metaphor for segregation and far-right ideologies, where he views humans superior to dragons and aims to make the Night Furies extinct, while controlling the dragons as a way to gain power. However, his issue as a character is that he is very similar to Drago from the previous films, to where Grimmel is almost a skinnier copy of him, and for who he is, his payoff isn't as satisfying. The character Link. However, as the leads are good or eventually get good, I can't really say the same about the villains. In fact, the weakest of the bunch would have to be Lord Piggott Dunsby. The head of the club that Sir Lionel really wants to be in that's very close-minded and is against progressive thinking or change in the status quo. He ends up being one of those backseat masterminds that sends his minions to do the dirty work to stop the main characters, and mostly see him get upset when things don't go his way. The assassin that plays in movies. On the perfection side, there is Lou, the blue-eyed blonde leader of the Institute that demands everything to be as perfect as him, including his people, and if he finds one piece of imperfection or anything that doesn't follow his agenda, then he will do anything to destroy it. I feel like there's a political commentary somewhere, I just can't put my finger on it.
And you're here to try to earn your ticket there. Better listen now or you haven't got a prayer.
Anyways, back on to the guy. He's the villain that serves as the big obstacle for our heroes. The movie does try to give him a backstory with the help of Ox, the mayor of Uglyville, but it falls flat since it comes out of nowhere and adds little significance to the plot. As for the other, like an innocent child, Sergey is the evil circus owner, Daisy is Gabby is the sympathetic antagonist who wants a new voice box in order to have a new owner and can be quite a threat with her army of frightening ventriloquist dummies. And then for one. The villain of the film, Zeta, is possibly the strongest new addition to the sequels with her manic personality and her need to get out of her winter environment by taking down the other islands and claim them as her own, on top of a fantastic performance by Leslie Jones. Then you have the villains of the feature, consisting of Mr. Burnish, who wants to capture the Yeti with the help of zoologist Dr. Zana and his security team. Out of all the characters in this film, they are possibly the most cliched of the bunch because they are exactly the same type of bad guys that are usually found in these films. They're the big government / big company that's chasing the heroes to capture the supernatural creature for their own benefits, whether it be for money, for fame, or to just destroy it entirely. Granted, Burnish does have a bit of a twist later in the picture, but other than that, they checked off every box in that list of tropes. Without going into details for spoiler reasons, while Margot is the generic villain of these types of stories, I will say what happens to her in the end is very confusing. Yeah, her secrets gets exposed in front of the whole town, but she doesn't get any consequences for it. Instead, her conclusion in this story ends up raising so many questions. These characters already And then there's the villain Otto Van Walrus, who highlights another serious issue with the film that I have yet to discuss. Think Swifty, the bad animation, and the stupidity that this movie calls writing is enough? Well, how about we add that this also blatantly rips off other animated films? Of course, it already shamelessly displayed how it took elements from Balto, but with the villain, he has an army of puffins that are trying to be the minions from Despicable Me, and the walrus himself is Mr. Waternoose from Monsters, Inc. There is no other way to put it. He deceives the characters, he hides an evil plan, and he's on this device that moves him around on these spider legs just like Mr. Waternoose. This movie happens for a scene or two. Emperor Maximus is the crazy villain, and the people who hang out with Charlie include an alien bounty hunter, an ant's eyes and ears, and Killian, who had the potential to be an interesting and threatening villain with some great build-up and presentation of what he can do, but his reasons to why he's evil threw those chances away and end up making him just another bad guy from a kid's flick. It is And then there are the villains, the Rock Trolls, led by Queen Barb. By the way, is it just me, or is it tiring to keep seeing rock as the evil music genre? Doesn't it feel like it's a bit overdone now? Anyways, to be very honest, there are plenty of times where I find myself rooting more for Barb than for Poppy. Since the film explains well her motives that help go more into the lore of the Trolls world, the idea of replacing country, techno, and pop with more rock sounds awesome, and her dad is Ozzy Osbourne playing as Ozzy Osbourne. Okay, some of those are more jokes than anything, but the point is, with her mission to unite the Trolls, even if it may not be the right way, Barb can be viewed as the hero of the feature more than Poppy. But then there's the villain Dick Dastardly, the one who got the best update in the film. Despite having robotic minion ripoffs and kind of being the typical bad guy, There's also another side of him that kinda makes him endearing thanks to his backstory involving Muttley. Not to mention that he does supply some of the better jokes in the film. Now, there is something. As for the new characters, the only significant additions are King Poseidon, the tyrannical ruler of Atlantic City who obsesses about his looks and needs Gary to get rid of his wrinkles, and Sage. And then there's the Lord Protector, who is actually the real 17th century English general, Oliver Cromwell. In the movie, he is depicted as the antagonist similar to Judge Frollo from Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, an authoritarian ruler that pursues order from his people. And the best way of doing so is by taking down all the wolves in the forest to assert his dominance. What makes him fascinating as a villain is how he is so attached to his religion. He's not the typical bad guy who only thinks of his own selfish needs. He views himself as a servant of God, and because his actions are meant to help empower his lord, he believes that he is doing what is best for his people, and to prove that God's will is mightier than any beast in the forest.